life, creating in terms of how we wanted to proceed in achieving African liberation. So check him out and Our Ancestors Voices, the program that this is every Sunday, same time, same platforms, hosted by myself, Ajamu, and my daughter, my biological and ideological daughter, Dr. Shakur Umi, and both of us are proud members of the AAPRP. So, to get us started on this topic, evidence that the U.S. empire is indeed crumbling, I'll turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Hello, hello. I definitely echo what you said, Baba Jamu. I'm really excited to talk about this topic today because just like when we pull on our ancestors' energy and it gives us strength, reminding us of what they sacrificed and what they went through so that we could be here today, I argue that capitalism is actually very talented and very successful at making us believe that this horrid and horrible system is the only way, and therefore we have to accept it and we have to not try to fight back. And so it's precisely topics like this one today that get me fired up and get me riled up because they remind me to be centered in us being placed and why we're doing this work. This topic today is a reminder of why we all should be resisting the very same system that has already done such a great job exploiting us. And it's really exciting also to speak from an evidence standpoint about how we know that the system is crumbling. This is a very hopeful topic. And so we hope that you will tune in with us. If you are able to share this link with other classmates and friends, family, whoever, partners, whatever, make sure you share it with them. Maybe you're able to share it with them and they can listen to it at a different time when they're available. But such an important topic. This right here is the reminder of why we get out of bed every day. So let's jump right into it and let's not hold back. So, starting with understanding how some of us are very much okay and happy with the way things are. And that's why the name of this slide is called We Are in Love with the Plantation, because some of us, not me, and probably not you, but maybe, I'm not sure. Um, some people, again, are convinced that protecting this system, this capitalist system, is their number one objective in life. They have no reason to understand that we should actually be critical and question why this system is so humane. And instead, they have been propagandized to believe that they need to protect this system. They need to stand for it. They need to justify it. They need to promote it. They need to let other people know why other systems like socialism and communism don't work. And I still find that hard to believe because communism has not ever been executed ever in life. So how do you know it doesn't work if you've never been able to measure it? I still don't understand that. Anyway, so those are those kind of people, and that's why they are protecting the plantation. This is very clear in terms of African people in particular, because within the US, there are Africans who love the identity more with the master than we do with ourselves and our people. Malcolm X talked about this in the classic fashion in his historic quote ballad or the bullet end quote speech in 1964. Quote, when the boss gets sick, the house slave says, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" End quote. And so, if you don't understand that quote, basically what Malcolm was saying was there is some deep, deep research that all of us should do just on our free time, or not free time, because that's a very problematic statement, because none of us are free, we're all oppressed. But in our time where we're not already alluded to doing something else, we should do more research on how oppression and trauma very much converts people into thinking that acceptance is the only way, because therefore then you have completely dismantled the possibility of breaking that chain and breaking that forced slavery or that forced engagement where you don't have your own advocacy and you don't have your own agency. So Malcolm is basically saying that, for enslaved Africans, for example, but you could easily substitute it for oppressed indigenous people, you could substitute it for oppressed Asian people, our comrades in Palestine, you could substitute it for anyone, even our comrades in Ireland who are struggling with fighting their colonization right now. Anybody who's oppressed, the oppressor, their number one objective is to dismantle your hope, to take that away, to make you think that you are nothing. without the oppressor. And you, as the oppressed, if we're looking at it psychologically, you, as the oppressed, now that you believe, because they've done a good job teaching you, that you are nothing without them, that means you also believe, as the oppressed, that you can't survive without them. And it's actually very deep and very serious. This is why we need to research it. If you don't know what I'm talking about right now, you got some serious work to do, because this is still going on today. This wasn't just in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. This is still very much happening today. The slide says plantation, and a lot of you are thinking we're talking about the 16th century when slavery first started, but we're actually talking about today, 2026, and how some of you don't want to miss work because you don't want to make your boss upset. Like, that's still the mentality, you all. You need to make those connections, draw out those connections. That is still the mentality. You don't want to do anything to rock the boat. That's the mentality. You don't want to do anything to upset the system. That is the mentality. It's all connected. It is all connected. So, yeah, when Malcolm said, when the boss gets sick, the house slave, notice he didn't say the field slave because those are two different ideologies, but the house slave says, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" Because now you have literally taken on the identity of the master, because you think what happens to the master also happens to you. And you have completely devoided the possibility that you have your own way of thinking, you have your own critical way of thinking, you are your own person. All of that has been completely eradicated. All of that has been completely eradicated. And you are more comfortable just doing what you think the boss wants so that you can continue to please the boss. Baba Ajamu, I don't know if you remember this, but I had a pet parakeet when I was like in high school, you all. And I remember that we got good at, like starting to trust the bird to make sure that, he wasn't going to be dangerous if we stuck our fingers in the cage and things like that. And eventually I got comfortable where I would open his cage door. And I was always trying to get him to come out. And it took him months, you all, to get comfortable coming out of the cage. And I think that that also speaks to Malcolm's statement very accurately, because he was more comfortable being enslaved, if you will, essentially. I mean, that is what we're talking about, versus having freedom. And he didn't want to trust the freedom. He didn't know if he could trust it. He was scared. There was a lot of risk involved with him leaving the cage, of course, but also 6 months of ideology needed to be undid, you all, before he realized, okay, I won't die if I leave this cage. At some point, they're going to return me, which I did, right? And so then he started to understand that pattern. But I think Malcolm is definitely speaking to that, where, like, we have to really kind of check in with our mental capacities and make sure that we understand how much damage has been done. This is why you have researchers like Dr. Joy DeGruy who do research on the post-traumatic slave syndrome, because there's evidence that supports that it very much impacts how we think even today. Very much impacts how we think even today. And so, unfortunately, many of us who will risk it all just to have a seat at the master's table, even as Malcolm also said, that we are seated, but we are not dining. And so, again, it's such a conundrum if you really think about it, because you're saying to the master, when the boss is sick, you're saying, the house slave is saying, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" Because you're thinking that you're him, because you're also thinking that, you all are the same. You're connected. You're a family. They look out for you. They feed you, all these other things. But in actuality, the master is still very clear that you are still in your place and the master is still in their place. They're not confused, but the enslaved African in the house is very much confused. And so I would argue Malcolm is saying in the second paragraph, you might be seated, but you're not dining. Those are two different things. Those are two different things. And I think the other part of it is for house slaves, because they had more access to things, they had more opportunities to do things. There was a very confused hierarchy where they thought that there was a more, critical importance, and there was a level of higher value and status compared to field slaves. Arguably so, because of the access and things like that, but not from the master's lens. Just between the slaves, as another way to deconstruct and as another way to divide, as another way to kind of create this classist, ideology very early on in the enslavement times. Like, all of that is based off of that. And so, even if you look at the images on the slide, why women deserve less, Myron Gaines, and we've got Candace, we've got Snoop, Nelly, Herschel. We can add Kanye or Ye, whatever name he's going by nowadays, 50 Cent, right? These are all examples of all of these Africans who love, love, love the plantation. They all value the dollar. over their own people's liberation. They value the dollar over their own people's liberation. That is so important to recognize. And it's also important to say as we move to the next slide, this is really important for you all to think about because it's easy for you all to even get confused and to buy into this notion that some of the celebrities we just talked about, Candace or Snoop or Nelly or Kanye or whoever, you're so busy falling in line with them. You're so busy, supporting them, and you think that they got you and they have your back. But just like the master and the enslaved African, like these celebrities understand they're in a different class bracket than you. They understand that you are not them. You might not understand that, but they understand that. And that's really important also to understand because the difference is they might not necessarily be living paycheck to paycheck. At least 50% of us on this call right now, if we lost our jobs tomorrow, that would be really, really effed up because we don't necessarily have money in savings to be able to navigate that as we now look for new employment. Snoop Dogg does not have that problem, you all. Kanye does not have that problem. Candace does not have that problem. They don't even understand. Those are the same people who will say, when you tell them that you lost your job, when you're going to see them in concert, they will say to you, how come you didn't have money in savings? You should have planned better. Because they don't even understand how their privilege has completely separated them from the overwhelming majority of working class people. They don't even understand that. So when we say empire, we got to dig deep. And I want you to look at this image on the slide while I try to break this down a little bit. So, the US is not a democracy. To be a democracy, a country must have an educated populace. And no one would argue that this is the case in the US today or ever. So this is not a democracy, you all, because we don't even have an educated populace to be able to kind of frame and dictate that. Okay. The US isn't a free country. It was built and is maintained throughout stealing indigenous people's land. Its wealth has come from the slave trade of my ancestors. Okay. The country's own independence happened in the middle of enslavement of millions of Africans. So the claim of freedom has not really been a serious one. And the last thing we could argue about this is that the US is an empire because its wealth is owned and controlled by people who would blow up the entire planet before they would submit to actual justice for the masses. And if you're not sure about what we just said, the people who are in control, these are the people who are determining what the policies are that are going to affect you and your children. You don't have control over that. And no offense, but you think voting is going to determine that, but it really doesn't. If you ask me, then what does that mean for the overturn of Roe v. Wade? I didn't vote in the last term, but let's just say hypothetically that I did. Roe v. Wade was overturned, what was that, 2022, 2023? And since then, it's been a little bit harder for me to have access to contraceptives. I've had a harder time having justification to let people know that I have a right to do what I want to do with my body. And I've also been in a worse position if I were still in Tennessee, where I wouldn't even be able to make those kind of decisions if I wanted to look at what it meant for pregnancy, alternative options, termination, whatever. That you're not even supposed to talk like that in states like that. So at least in California, I have a little bit more options. But do I? Do I really have options? Because they're still like pushing where other people were in control of these overarching policies. And don't get me started on if you have access to health insurance, that still has a determining factor on what you can really benefit from, because your health insurance determines what kind of resources and materials we even have access to. So don't get a bad health insurance that doesn't support that you should have the right to determine what you want to do with your body. Don't do that, because then you're not going to be able to get the support that you need. So this is all empire. This is all the empire. This is all based on the empire. This is all based on the empire. And let's not forget, this is not the end all be all. If you remember when I went to Cuba, I told you they don't even have health insurance companies there. They don't have any insurance company there because, from a socialist standpoint, they don't see the value and the humanistic purpose of profiting off of someone's demise or dismay. So when your car breaks down, they do not have a tow truck company that you have to pay for to tow your vehicle. If you need to see a doctor, there is free universal health care. So you do not have to pay a premium or a copay to see a doctor. Baba Ajamu went to Cuba and told you that he had a root canal done for free, you all. I did not need to see a medical provider while I was there, but my comrade did. And I asked her to tell me about her experience. And she said it was the best bedside manner she had ever received in her life. Everybody was thorough. They kept asking her questions. They wanted her to take all these tests to make sure that she was okay. And she felt like that was some of the best care that she had ever received. And I knew the answer, but I asked her anyway, how much did you have to pay? And she said nothing. And I said, how did that feel? And she said, it was surreal. I was so nervous because I didn't know how much it was going to cost. And I kept forgetting about the universal health care. I mean, just listening to that story makes me teary because she shouldn't have to be worrying about how much her health is going to cost. She should just be worrying about getting better, you all. But that's the empire. The empire is more focused on how much you can provide for health instead of focusing on you actually getting healthy because the empire doesn't care about you. They just care about your dollars. And the sooner that we all recognize that, I really think the sooner we'll all be better off. Because if you're still protecting capitalism after just hearing me tell that story, I need you to explain to me why you're doing that. To me, that's a waste of your energy. That's a waste of your labor. This system does not care about you. This system does not care about you. If you get in a car accident tomorrow, but you didn't pay that car insurance premium, you're not even going to be able to pay for your car to get fixed. And let's assume that the other driver also doesn't have insurance. That's a clear example of this system not caring about you. We spend all this time having money and paying bills so that we can manage all this stuff that doesn't even matter at the end of the day because we're still not where we want to be. We're still stressed and we're still having a hard time figuring it out. That is the empire, you all. That is not the same lifestyle for people who live in socialist empires. It's not the same because they just have a different way of actually putting the humanity first. So, in case you didn't look at the image on the left, I just want to highlight before I turn it back over to Baba Ajamu. You see at the beginning, at the top, you have the ruling class in red. And then you see it has the two down lines that go into different directions pointing downward. So on the left side, you see owns and controls, and you see the yellow for corporations. On the right side, you see I need to bring this closer. Okay, you see bankrolls and you see bribes, and then you have politicians in white. In the center, you have military industrial complex, which is connected to the corporations and the politicians. And then down below for corporations, we have global banking and we have corporate media. Below for politicians, we have government, executive, legislation, and then we have courts. And then all of these four that you see, the corporate media, the global, the government, and the courts, they all lead down to citizens. They all connect to citizens. So government controls, courts punish, we have corporate media that influences, and we have global banking that I think it's coerces. Yeah, coerces. This is a great image, Baba Jamu. I need this in my PowerPoint. Yeah, so with that, you all, we just need to think more about why we say empire. And more importantly, which side of the fight are you on? Are you protecting this plantation? Why? Ask yourself that. And better yet, have a justifiable reason to give us the next time we talk, because this simply doesn't make any sense. And you have to really decide how your energy is going to be spent. None of this is going to matter if we really can't trust you because you're still going to protect this empire at the end of the day. We say burn it all to the ground because this empire does not need to exist anymore. And we stand by that. Increase your political education and do the research. Don't take our word for it. We only have an hour to try to give you tools and resources. It's up to you to take the lead from there. Ashe.
Ashe, obrigada, asante sana, medasi. Thank you very much. And I think that what you have laid out here is perfect segue into the next section that I'll cover. And I want to start by saying, my life is different than I would argue than the overwhelming majority of people in this country that we live in. And I say that because of the political work that I do, right? As it relates to my organizing work in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, that takes me to all types of people, all types of African people. And because of our relationships with other communities, all types of indigenous people or Latino people, all types of Asian folks, all types of folks. And in recent years, it's led me to a lot of European communities, white communities, who reach out because and I'll talk a little more about this in a second, but white communities have become much more radicalized than they used to. I've been doing this work a long time. I've seen this transition happen. They're much more radicalized than they used to. In fact, I'll be spending all next weekend training a bunch of white high school students primarily on political education and how to engage in activism. So this is my life. And then the job I have, allows me the opportunity to talk to all types of people, people in rural areas, redneck folks, racist folks, all kind of folks. I have regular exposure to all these kind of people. So that's put me in a very unique situation in terms of that, coupled with the study and the work that I do in the APRP, understanding how this system works. And one of the things that I've come to understand clearly is that most people, I would say 98% of the people in this country cannot, are not in a position to give you a comprehensive understanding of how the capitalist system works. Even though capitalism is the dominant economic system on the planet Earth, and the United States is the world leader in capitalist economy, 98% of the people here can't tell you, if you ask them, give me a comprehensive definition of how capitalism works, they can't tell you. So what I'm going to do to start this is just give you a short definition of how the capitalist system works. And there's a book that I suggest you read. It's called Who Rules America? Who Rules America? It's by a man. His name is William Dornhoff, Dornhuff. Who Rules America? You should definitely read that book if you have an interest in understanding how the capitalist system works. Because what that book and many other sources explain is, first, who is it that is in control of this society and the entire world? Like, is it you, or you, because you vote, are you the ones that make, because that's what they want you to believe? Well, you're the ones that make the decisions. But if that were true, then I could look at you and I could say, so tell me why you decided that the US should bomb Iran, because you're the one in control. You make the decisions, you decide that. And maybe it's that, they called you to get your vote and you just weren't there and you missed the call. But we all know that nobody asked you anything about that. And you can express your opinion about it as much as you want. It's not going to influence the decision that's made. And the reason for that is because we don't control what happens in this society. As much as we want to believe that we do, we're not free. We don't control any of this. We don't control any of it that happens. And there is a clear structure for how decisions are made in this society. And there are a number of families that dictate policy in this society. And you should know who those people are. They're not nameless, faceless people. The Rockefeller family is one of the ruling class families in the international capitalist system. The Rothschild families, the Morgan family, J.P. Morgan Chase, that family, the DuPonts, the oil magnates, these are the families who own and control the means of production on the planet Earth. And in that book I described to you, what he does is he breaks down how these families function. So we don't have time for me to talk about all the families, but I'll talk about the Rockefeller family, for example. The Rockefeller family has been dominant within the US capitalist system for centuries, not 5 years, not 10 years, centuries. They've been dominant within the capitalist system in this country. And the way that they've done it is they have had chancellors in 19 of the highest Ivy League universities in this country. People running these institutions have had the name Rockefeller. I'm talking about Yale, Princeton, Harvard. At one time or another, they've had people who were in the position to govern curriculum at those universities. And if you know how education works in this society, it's the Ivy League schools that dictate curriculum for all the other colleges and universities. And those institutions dictate the curriculum for all the K through 12. So in essence, these people have positioned themselves over the last, we'll say 300 years, to have a dominant influence on how information has been communicated in this country's history. The Rockefeller family has had a dominant influence on that. And then beyond that, they've held political office. They've had, I think it's up to 30 uh, leading governmental positions in the country where they've been senators, they've been governors, they've been House of representatives. They've even had at least one person that was vice president, Nelson Rockefeller. So they've had the political influence. For centuries, they've done this. And they've been able to influence, reign their influence that way. Now, from a corporate standpoint, they've been dominant. They own, to this day, today, they own controlling stock and interest in all of the NBC National Broadcasting Company affiliates: NBC, MSNBC, CNBC, CNN. All of those are CNN affiliates, and the Rockefeller family owns controlling interests in all of those propaganda mechanisms. They also own controlling interests in Chevron oil. So if you know that, and we're going to talk about what's happening in Iran next week, but if you understand what I just said, then it shouldn't be that difficult to understand how the U.S. has been trying to get to Iranian oil and dominate their economy for the last 80 years. This is not anything new. It didn't just happen with this Trump idiot. It's been going on with both the Democratic and the Republican Party for the last 80 years with Iran. And a lot of it, it's not just the oil, but a lot of it has to do with controlling oil, because Iran has always been a high oil producing country. They've always been one of the countries in OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting countries rather, OPEC. So they've always been there. And so the U.S. has constantly been, trying to be a thorn in their side because of that result. So if you know that, then you're watching one of these NBC affiliates and you're watching expecting to get an objective analysis about what's happening with Iran. And those affiliates are dominantly owned by the Rockefeller family, which also owns Chevron, which means they have a heightened interest in oil. Guess what? You're not going to get any type of objective analysis about what's going on. And this is how the capitalist system works. That's how these people can ensure that their interests are carried out. And if you remember the graph from the previous page, the role of corporate media is to influence you. And I know that everybody wants to believe that they think for themselves. I mean, nobody wants to sit there and say, I don't think for me. I just, all I do is I'm just a conduit. People plug ideas and actions into me, and I just parrot out and vomit out what they tell me to do. Nobody wants to see themselves like that. But let's look at the irrefutable truth. There are people that you will never see in your entire life. You'll never meet them. And they talk just like you do. They use the same slang that you do. They interpret things the same way you do. They dress the same way you do. They have the same interests that you do. And you have the same interests that they do. They like the same types of cars that you like. They like the same music that you like. They like the same food that you like. You have never met them. They've never met you. You will never see them in your life. They will never see you in your life. How else do you explain that except to recognize that there are clearly forces that are influencing what we think? Otherwise, there's no way so many of us would be pretty much the same in terms of how we think. People say the same things. People have the same faith. And not only, I don't mean the same faith, but they have the same way that they interpret their faith. They have the same process of interpreting their faith. I was listening to a minister the other day on a radio broadcast, and he is a practitioner of liberation theology. And liberation theology is, not the type of Christian church that we grew up in that, basically reinforced us thinking and acting like slaves. But liberation theology is that you use the teachings of the gospel to empower you to fight against injustice. And for me, like if you have a faith and you're not using it for that, it's like Malcolm X said, we don't care, we don't want to hear about it. It's worthless. It has no value. That's to me, that's the only point of having a faith. And I'm an extremely spiritual person, but you can ask around. Like if I'm in a room with you and people and somebody comes in with a gun, you ask anybody that knows me, yeah, he'll act, he'll do something. Even if it means he gets killed, he'll do something. Everybody that knows me knows that. Because I have a higher thing that I believe in than just preserving my own individual life. But I talk to all these people, I have ultimate faith in God. They wouldn't do that. They'd be looking for somewhere to hide. Talking about they have all this faith and all they want to do is preserve themselves. So I don't understand that. But my point is that these entities, these ruling class entities, they control everything that happens on earth. And they have set up institutions that are designed to ensure that we operate in a way that protects their interests at all times, and that we think that we're the ones making those decisions. So this is the reason why it's important to understand this, because the way we know that their system is cracking, that it's not working like it used to, is all we have to do is evaluate the objective circumstances, right? Now, Kwame Ture talked about in the 90s. Of course, if you don't know who he was, in the 60s of Stokely Carmichael, he was one of the faces of the civil rights movement. He was the chair of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, which was a critically important organization to the civil rights movement in the 60s. The freedom rides, the sit-ins, the voting rights projects that they engaged in Mississippi and Alabama opened the voting rights process up so that you can participate in it today. Even if you don't know who SNCC is, they are who you should thank for your right to vote if you see it as a right today. The U.S. military had nothing to do with fighting for your right to vote. So you don't need to thank them. You should thank the people who got their heads busted in Mississippi and Alabama fighting for your right to vote. So they did that work. And Kwame was also the face of the Black Power movement. And of course, he moved to Africa and became active in the Pan-African movement. And he's one of the very reasons why I'm here talking to you today. So one of the things Kwame used to always talk about in the 90s was he used to talk about the left wing and the right wing are both now protesting against the government in this country. And when he would say this, I would always organize security for him. So I'd go around with him in the 80s and 90s when he was speaking before he made his physical transition. And I didn't understand what he was saying. And I would ask him about it and he would explain. And I didn't understand it. I understand it completely now. What he was saying 30 years ago is that, and he would say it like, the white right, as he called them, they're engaging in activities today, he's talking about in the 90s, that in the 60s they would have called communist. And he would know because he was on the front line in the civil rights movement, and all these Europeans, all these white people would come out and engage in terrorist acts against young people like him who were just fighting for our rights to exist as human beings in the South, and they would call them communists. That's why he said that, because he had the actual experience of dealing with that. And so what he was saying is that fast forwarding to the 90s, and certainly even more today than in the 90s, those same white people are protesting against the government. You can say what you want about the insurrection on January 6th, but that was a protest. That's what it was. And the point, I'm not for any of these people. Okay, so don't get it twisted. What the point I'm making is that these folks that would never have protested before have reached the point where they're protesting against the government today. So now the people on the left have always protested against the government, protested police terrorism, protested against immoral and illegal war, protested against poverty, protested against anti-immigrationism, protested against Islamophobia. The people on the left have always done this. But now you see people on the right, and even a lot of people who wouldn't identify either way are now out at these no kings. These are thousands of people coming out protesting. It's not even controversial now to say I was at this event talking about what's going on. People will do that. And if the left perceives the right getting its way, they're going to protest. If the right perceives the left getting its way, they're going to protest. Now, what Kwame's point is that it's not that we understand that the right is reactionary. A lot of people on the left are reactionary. We get that. We have a saying that we say as African revolutionaries, we say left or right, still white. So we're not under this confusion that, we get it. We understand this clearly, you all. But what we're saying is that, and what Kwame's point is that as more and more people protest, that from a dialectical standpoint makes the possibility for change greater. And this is what we're keying into, right? This is what we want to see. The political agenda of the super rich, it can't be hidden anymore. It used to be a hidden agenda. It's out in the open now. I remember when I joined the APRP in 1984, nobody in this country, I don't care what the hell people say now, you can look at articles, you can look at research, you can do your own research. Nobody was loudly speaking against Zionism in the support of the Palestinians like we were. We were the only people doing that. We certainly were the only people in the African community doing that. Nobody else was doing that, with the notable exception of the Nation of Islam. We were the only two groups doing that in the 80s. Nobody else was doing it. And today, everybody's doing it. I go to events and people tell me, here, I went to an event and the young person said, here, just so you can understand what's happening in Palestine. And, I could have told them, I've written probably about 50 articles on Palestine, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I was overjoyed. I'm happy because I dreamed for this day when the work that we did so long ago would begin to flourish and produce these results. This is a beautiful thing. It's not about me. I didn't tell them who I was. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. But the point is that it's now evolved to that, where everybody knows about that. The continued exploitation of Africa. I can say anything now talking about this empire, and it's not even controversial. When I started doing this work, it was extremely controversial to criticize the U.S. government in public. Nobody did that like that. You at the Cold War, you at the U.S. against the Soviet Union. Nobody with you raised any criticism of this country, people called you communist, and that was a bad word. It still is, but it had consequences in the sense that you had to worry about being physically attacked in that reality. I lived through that. We did this work under that environment. So I'm not talking about something somebody told me. This is what my experience was as a young man. I remember I made a flyer before the internet in 1984. The first flyer I made, it was for a film at Sacramento State University that we put together on the assassination of Fred Hampton, the leader of the Illinois Black Panther Party. And we didn't have flyers. We didn't have computers. So the way we made flyers in those days is you cut words out of the newspaper, the Sacramento Bee here at that time. You cut the words you needed and the flyers, and you cut a picture out. The flyers look like ransom notes, but that's what we had available to us. And so I copied these flyers on the mimeograph machine that we had. We were so proud that we had money to buy a mimeograph machine, and we had the purple flyers because that's how they would come out. And I'm passing them out on campus, and I passed one to this African student, and it said the government killed Fred Hampton. That's what I had on the flyer. And the brother looked at it and he said, "You can't prove that." And he was ready to fight. He was so mad. That was 1984. Now, today, any one of you, no matter what's your level of consciousness, whether you know who Fred Hampton is, whatever, right wing, left wing, if I told you the government killed someone who was challenging it, you wouldn't question that at all. You'd be like, yeah, I'm sure they did. This is an example of the advanced collective consciousness. And the fact that that's the case makes this empire that much more unstable. That's a reality. Everybody knows about political corruption. I mean, people think, those of us that are older, the 1970s Watergate scandal, that's nothing compared to what every week there's a scandal. Now they talk about the dude that's the FBI director is a drunk and showing up to meetings reeking of alcohol. Like I would have never envisioned anything like that when I was a child growing up. This is a sign of the crumbling of this empire, you all. Everybody knows all of these things are happening now. And this is the first step towards dismantling this lying platform. They can't tell you anything now that you'll believe it. You don't believe anything they say because you know that it's all based on lies, all of it. And so this makes the economic evidence of eventual collapse unavoidable. Right now, the pictures on the screen are pictures of Botswana and the Congo. Botswana, they're mining for resources in Botswana on the left, and he's grinning. And on the right, they're mining for resources in the Congo. And what's happening is people in Africa are tired of seeing all the wealth leave Africa and nothing be left behind. And all the wealth is in Europe and the US. Since the slave trade, this has been the model. And people in Africa are rising up resisting that. So this is a change. We've always resisted, but now Africa's on fire all over the continent right now. And this is something that makes those of us who love Africa excited for the potential of what we will be able to do to organize folks to make the change that we need. But it's important for those of you that are here. The U.S. is a debtor nation on the world market, and this is significant because this feeds into the political narrative that because the U.S. is a debtor nation, because the U.S. isn't producing anything, like they still promote this same backward propaganda. Well, the U.S. is the number one country in the world. Everybody that heard me just say that, that's not your first time hearing that. You've heard that a million times. The U.S. is the number one country in the world. Number one country in what? It's not the number one country producing food. It's not the number one country in education. It's not the number one country in healthcare. It's on the bottom of all the industrialized countries in all of those critically important areas. The only areas where the U.S. is at the top of the list is in the number of people that are incarcerated here, right at the top there. In fact, China incarcerates more people, but they're a billion point 700 million people in China. Okay, there's only 300 million people in the US. So by percentage, the US incarcerates more people than any other country on earth. So at the top of the list with that, at the top of the list of having diseases that are unable to be addressed, at the top of the list on poverty, at the top of the list in houselessness, at the top of the list in having the poorest educated people, even though the most resources to educate people exist here. They have convinced so many of us that reading a book is a crime, so people don't do it. All you have to do is have an internet account and a rocks floating around between your ears, and you can say whatever you want on the internet. And ignorance is a flex in this society. You don't have to know what the hell you're talking about, but you got a right to say it. Your truth is your truth. That's how bad. Like, y'all gotta understand. People in the rest of the world look at that as insanity. There's no such thing as your truth. There's a objective truth. And those of you that say that your truth is you don't even believe that. Because if you believe that, you would run out on a busy freeway and say, well, if I get hit, I'm not going to feel any pain because my truth is no, there's objective truth. You run your ass out there on that freeway and get hit, that's going to be traumatic for you. I don't care who you are. That's objectively true. So this is the reality that we're dealing with. And because of this, nobody's afraid of this country anymore. Nobody cares. Nobody's afraid of this country. You used to be, well, you had the Soviet Union. Without the Soviet Union, nobody could stand up to the U.S. Everybody stands up to you. Now you got Iran fighting a propaganda war against the U.S. And I would argue winning, certainly winning with the majority of people on earth. Further isolating the U.S., further isolating it, not making it safe for you. And then that's the reason why people here are like, wait, what is this? What's going on? Even people here, even people who would have supported the Vietnam War in the 60s now are like, this war makes no sense. It does nothing to benefit us. And that's the question. We talked about that last week. You've got to ask the question when these things happen, who benefits? Nobody on here hearing this can tell us how these attacks against Iran are benefiting your life, unless you're super rich and you're privy to these investments these people are making, these criminals are making, because they're making a lot of money. But the overwhelming 99.9% of us that we're not in the position to do that. So this is not benefiting you in any way. Africa's on fire. Protests are everywhere against imperialist control of industries. 20 years ago, everybody in Africa just wanted to come here or to Europe. Now, we have an organization that is active all over Africa. I've traveled to many of those areas. So I'm not talking about something somebody told me. I'm talking about what I know from doing the work. And now people aren't talking about coming here like they used to. A lot of people are talking about how do we get control of our resources back. This is a threat to this empire. This was a crack in the armor. I remember the first time I went to Ghana, first time I went to Africa in 1991. I remember this guy was telling me, Jesus is going to make it so that I can go to America and get rich. And I said, well, isn't Jesus, the love of Jesus and the power of Jesus universal? Oh, yes, my brother, it's universal. I'm like, so then why can't Jesus make you prosperous here in Accra, Ghana? Why do you have to go to the U.S. to get prosperity? Jesus only works in the U.S.? And then he got mad, but he couldn't respond to it. He couldn't say it. But now you don't find people talking that way anymore. It's been a change. So what's next? Look at what's happening around you. There are more labor strikes, protests, uprising against the system than ever before. Every week, some labor force is striking and protesting. The militancy is growing against the system, you all. This is happening right before your very eyes. The only thing, every week, every time they have these protests, there are thousands of people protesting. 10,000, 50. I did security for the high school students back in January when they had their walkout. And this is Sacramento. Sacramento will never be confused for New York or San Francisco for radical protests. This is not a radical protest town. It drives me crazy sometimes, but that's the reality here. But that day, there were at least 15,000 high school students at the state capitol protesting. They didn't even have a sound system. I could have hooked them up because I have sound equipment. I didn't know. They had one of those speakers you take to the park when you have a barbecue. That was their sound system. And they didn't even care. They just kept chanting, F ICE, F Donald Trump, F ICE, F Donald Trump. 15,000 youth, babies, doing this on their own. Nobody was leading them. Nobody was telling them what to do. They wouldn't have listened even if you did. My point is that you gotta see all this happening all around you. Even if you're living in a bubble, that doesn't mean everybody else is, okay? People are waking up, and that makes the system weaker when that happens. So the only thing missing is increased organization of these efforts. That's the part that's missing. And for people like me, that's where I come in. That's where I see my role, coming in there to help bring that organization to these efforts, because the answers depend on us. Conditions are more ripe for change than they've ever been in this country. I know that they don't want you to believe that, but it's true. More than they ever have, they're ripe for change. They want you to think there's no possibility, there's no hope. Just give up. Just get high, just get drunk, just have sex, just have fun, go to the club. Don't, you can't change. That's what they want you to think, but that's not true. There's more possibility for change now than ever. So, the to get along period of history is coming to an end. Whether you want it to or not, it's coming to an end, right? Everyone has to take some role in this struggle. You can decide what it is. We're not here to tell you what to do, but we're saying you cannot sit on the sidelines. All levels of revolutionary organizing, all levels of work, from revolutionary organizing to electoral politics, everything has a place. Please hear me when I say that. I'm sick of people telling me, well, you're against voting. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. No, nobody ever said that. We just said that we have to organize our power if we're going to use these institutions. So if you're going to vote, we can help you. We're not doing that because we have a different, everybody doesn't need to do the same thing. There's different work that needs to take place. But if you want to do it, we can help you do it more effectively than you're doing it right now, because we have organizing skills that where we know how to do the work in a way that can help you build power. So that's what we need to do with that to make that happen. But everybody has a role. If it's played properly, it'll play a decisive role in helping make the change you need. Because what this comes down to is the system is cracking. Everybody knows it. That's why they're reacting to it the way they are. And we have to build movements, and that means learning a whole different level of patience, working with people than we have right now. And we have to build that. But we can do it. And if you're like, well, I can't do it, I don't have any patience, then figure out what else you can do. You can donate, you can get involved in other ways. But the time is now. We are winning, you all. And that's the message that you should take away from this if you don't take anything else. And the days of this empire are numbered. And we thank you for joining us today. We want to invite you back next week, the 26th of April, same time, same platforms. We're going to have an analysis. We're going to provide an analysis on what's happening in Iran, why it's happening, what's happening, what you're not going to get from the news and all these capitalist corporate media sources. You get it right here if you tune in. The QR code in the upper left, the red and white one, will bring you, if you scan it, to all the AAPRP programs, this one included. We have a forward ever shop where you can buy articles of clothing that reflect positive, uplifting messages, and it helps us fund our work in Africa. So do that. Hood Communist is a revolutionary blog. You should want to read there so you can get some real education. So you can do that in that QR code. And if you're in the Sacramento area, every Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m., we have community self-defense at 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15, 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15. That's cottage, like cottage cheese. Everybody's welcome. You don't need to register or anything. Just show up, wear comfortable clothes. Last Thursday, we talked about, we have our political education. We talked about this no tax on tips and how that's a scam. We talked about that. And then we, engaged in self-defense practice and techniques. So come on out and tell people. If you're not in Sacramento, tell people so they can come. And then we have African Liberation Day coming up next month. May 30, those of you here where I am, you can go to our website, www.africanliberationday.net, and you can find the commemoration taking place near you. We have 24 of them that we're organizing and participating in all over the world. But if you're here in Northern California, if you're going to be here, the one that we are working on is going to be in Oakland, California on May 23rd from 1 to 4 p.m. At the Eastside Arts Alliance. You can go to that website, AfricanLiberationDay.net, to get the details. But you should donate to African Liberation Day. We're organizing it all over Africa, all over Europe, all over the Americas. But in the Americas and in Europe, we fund them in these areas. But in Africa, we have to raise funds because our people are viciously exploited and oppressed. They don't have money. So help us organize around African Liberation Day. You see the theme: revolutionary Pan-Africanism will defeat Western imperialism. That's the theme. So we want you to come out and do that. That's the theme for the one in Oakland. You go to the site we have, because it was the one here we're doing was with different groups. The one in the theme we have for the party everywhere else, you can see it on the site, AfricanLiberationDay.net. But donate. Go to Venmo. It's on the screen there. Africa AAPRP at AAPRP. So go ahead and donate what you can. Join the AAPRP, AAPRP-INTL. Get information on how you do that. Burkina Books, the black and white QR code in the bottom right is some of the work happening in the Sahel. You become a monthly sponsor, so you should do that. It's great work to bring revolutionary consciousness to African people in the Sahel nations, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, etc. And then the upper right, the QR code, my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. Scan the QR code. It's only $8. We ask you to buy it. It's a great organizing book. 100% of the proceeds go towards anti-fascist work happening in the Sacramento area, like the self-defense classes I mentioned. We did some weapons trainings for women and marginalized folks a week ago. We want to continue that. That costs money. So I use 100% of the proceeds from the sale of the book to finance that work. It's a great book, and it helps us to do the work. Call your library, get it in there. Call your bookstores, get it in there. Help us organize, get involved, stay up. We are winning. Forward ever. Enjoy the rest of your day.